19 years now. Oh,
sorry, Nikki.
No worries. So as you get that, the loudspeaker, right? I've been at SERC for about 19 years now, and prior to coming to SERC, I taught middle school and high school as a general ed teacher. So I bring the perspective of general education and special education, and I work with districts all over the state. I have to slow down my speech so that our interpreter can get everything that I'm saying. I don't want to talk too fast.
Are you ready for the slides?
I am, thank you. So today, I'm hoping that you will be engaged, be an active learner, right? Because there's just so much information out there. Feel free to ask questions. You can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand. And I also have time at the end for questions. So today, in our short time together, I was going to share some information on some of the inclusive practices that we work with districts on. And those are a step-by-step approach for inclusive schools, which I'll talk about, co-teaching, and universal design for learning. All three of these happen to be in my favorites bucket of trainings that I do. So. Okay. And so at the end of our session, I'm hoping you will know some of the key principles for educating students in the general education environment, understand the urgency for equitable access, participation, and progress for vulnerable learners. And I'm guessing as parents that you understand that urgency because it's probably your own kiddos that we're thinking about. So definitely want to make sure we're supporting our students. And then we'll talk about some universal practices that can be used to change outcomes for all students and support our students with disabilities. Okay. So SERC's mission is all about equity, excellence, and education. And since 1969, students with disabilities has been at the forefront of our mission for providing equity. So you'll see there's a few acronyms on this page, which I will tell you what they mean. I didn't want to type them all out because I try not to have too many words on each slide. But we think about these characteristics that schools embody when they provide supports for students. So we think about providing FAPE, which is free, appropriate public education, within the LRE, the least restrictive environment. And so we know each student has their own least restrictive environment, but we want to think about how can we provide access to general education curriculum so that every student is a general ed student first, right? We use a decision making that promotes inclusive education. So in the past, and I hope this doesn't happen too often, schools would say something like, Nikki has autism. She has to go to this program at this building, right? Or Nikki has a behavioral challenge, so she goes in this program. I know schools still have programs, but hopefully they're not making those decisions just on the label. They're looking at the whole child and saying, this is what Nikki needs. So she, this program might be helpful for her.
Nikki, I'm going to interrupt you and just tell you that because of the shortages in staff, it's been a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that.
I think things were getting better, and then with the lack of people in the building, sometimes those things are happening again.
Yeah, that's a real real barrier, unfortunately, right now. And then we look at providing a continuum of support. So districts should have a range of options, which I'll share more about in a few minutes. But you know, there should be something in between the general ed classroom and the most restrictive settings, which, you know, I'll go over those. And then those program options are created based on inclusive philosophy and practices. So thinking about how can we get students in the general ed classroom more often? And if they can't be in that classroom, at least exposure to general ed curriculum materials. Okay. And I just want to check in with our interpreter. Is the pace okay?
Everything sounds wonderful, Nikki. Thank you from the interpreter.
Thank you so much. Okay, so you can see we have a graphic of our continuum of services. And so at the very bottom, we would consider that the least restrictive option, all the way up to a hospital or institution would be the most restrictive. And so while some students may absolutely need that hospital or institutionalized setting, that would be their environment where they function the best, we also think about this in terms of time with non-disabled peers, which is something that the state measures and reports to the federal government on. We have some outcomes and measures that we've been looking at for many years relative to how much time students spend with other children who don't have disabilities. So we look at general ed class, where the student may not have a whole lot of supports. They can be pretty successful with just, you know, a few minimum supports in that classroom. Then we have, moving up the continuum, a general ed placement that has collaborative consultation. So maybe you have a child who's learning speech and they're in the general ed classroom, and their speech teacher consults with the general ed classroom teacher to help implement the goals and objectives. So you might see something like that. You might see students in a general ed classroom and then have access to a resource room. So at a high school, you might see instead of a study hall, the student has a resource period where they go and, you know, get help with their math or their science or any of those other pieces that they might be working on. Then we have co-teaching. Sorry, I skipped right over that one. A general ed classroom with co-teaching is where we have two teachers in the same room. And so the student is able to be in the general ed class more frequently because there are two teachers. And that's one of the practices that we will talk about this morning. And then you might have students in a special ed classroom with some time in general ed. So that might look like the student has their reading and math and science in a special ed classroom, but then maybe they go to music or art or band or, you know, some other subject like that. Then you have the full-time special ed classroom, right? And then other options. So a special day school, a residential school, hospital, or institution, right? So as you move up, the setting gets more restrictive because the student needs many more supports to be successful. And then they're getting obviously less time with their non-disabled peers, okay? So, you know, schools may not have all of these options, but hopefully they have at least a few of the options. You know, we've worked with schools.
If they don't have them, excuse me, Nikki, if they don't have them, then they can find them too. They can look to, you know, they wouldn't have a hospital or institution, but they would help the student find a placement that would be appropriate for them.
Exactly. So.
Thank you.
Excellent. You can go to the next one if you want. Okay. So the first strategy I'm going to talk about is actually a few different tools that come from Stetson and Associates. They're based in Houston, Texas. Their step-by-step approach for inclusive schools training. This is an initiative we've been working with Dr. Stetson for 20 plus years. I think we're in the 25-year range now in Connecticut. And so we have several trainers who have been endorsed by Stetson and Associates so that we have folks in Connecticut who can provide this training. There are a number at SERC and several throughout the RESC regions. And we collaborate together to provide this training for schools. This is one of my favorite trainings that we offer. So we can talk about that. Here's just an agenda from the 3-day training, just to give you an idea of what kinds of things are covered in this 3-day training. During the training, schools actually come as a team of people, and they are required to send their administrator, their a general ed teacher, a special ed teacher, student support services staff. So they might include, you know, a couple social workers or a speech path or, you know, a school psychologist. Any of those folks might attend as part of the team. And then the idea is the team gets the training and then takes it back to their school. And then we can actually work with individual, you know, either grade level teams or building teams to help them implement some of the practices. But in this 3-day training, they cover pretty much all of the information about inclusive practice that you may want to know about, and give you lots of options to implement in your building. So day 1 starts with the foundation, getting everybody on the same page and having the same understanding of, you know, different definitions about inclusive practices. They talk about the myths, which is a great activity because some teachers might say, oh, well, I didn't get my degree in special ed, so I don't know how to support students in my classroom. And, you know, they actually debunk those myths and say that, you know, you don't need to have a degree in special ed to have, you know, students with an IEP in your class, right? And so it looks at different ways that you can support those students. Day 2 actually takes you through a simulation with some students, and you look at making decisions based on the students' needs and not their labels. So I can give you a snapshot of those forms in a few minutes. And then day 3, they actually talk more about some of the other topics that are often barriers for schools. So having time to collaborate with other teachers. I know that's something we hear all the time, that teachers don't have enough time to work with each other and, you know, plan for instruction with, you know, all of the teammates. We look at, you know, if you are going to pull students out into a special ed classroom or a self-contained type of classroom, we look at some standards for what those should look like, right? Because we recognize some kids need that. We give some more information about using para-educators or paraprofessionals so that we are, you know, effectively using that resource. I talk about peer tutoring programs and peer buddy programs to support kids, you know, and then technical and adaptive challenges. So that would be the idea of, we can fix the schedule, which would be a technical change, but to get people to embrace an inclusive philosophy, right, if that's not something that they've already had, would be an adaptive challenge, because you have to kind of change your frame of mind and your kind of what's in your heart. So those are harder to do, but hopefully people come along as they see that.
Nikki, have you ever had a training when you didn't have someone with that adaptive challenge?
We have, and
Oh,
so
that's
I have been at CERC for a really long time. The driver of this work was the PJ settlement agreement. So for those of you not familiar, kids with intellectual disabilities were pretty much not included in general ed environments. They were often sent to special schools or separate programs within a school. And so because there was a class action lawsuit, that drove a lot of the work that happened in special ed. And so some districts were required to attend the training and didn't think that they had any issues. And sometimes when you're required to, it's not necessarily the best environment for change. But, you know, I think we just support the schools over time. And, you know, I think eventually people come along and realize that they need to need to do better. So, okay. So this is one of the activities from the first day of the training. This looks at a strategy called multi-level instruction. And we'll actually see how this connects when we talk about universal design a little bit later this morning. So basically, instead of a teacher having to create 28 different lesson plans for the 28 students in their class, if they design their activities, their instructional activities, in a way that has a lot of flexibility and a lot of project-based foundation, then they can reach more learners with that one single lesson plan. And so, you know, we try to help teachers understand that you don't have to have a separate plan for every single student, because you have 28 students, they're all probably different and they all have different needs, right? So thinking about how teachers can do things that are more activity-based instruction versus a lecture format, right? So if a teacher is just up in the front of the room lecturing, it's not as engaging, it's hard for students to follow, perhaps. So it's not easy. And when I was teaching, I loved doing projects because I felt I could really understand where students were when I assessed them. And it was very hands-on, and you know, the learning was very authentic. So I'm a huge proponent of project-based lessons.
Can I ask you to debunk a myth while you're on that subject? Because
Sure.
I was in a meeting and the recommendation from the BCBA was for the students' instruction to be more project-based because of who the student was as a learner. And the team said, we can't do that with Common Core. And I didn't understand that, because you can do a project about anything, right? So will you help me to debunk that?
Yes, absolutely. So the Common Core is a very broad set of standards that explain what kids need to be able to do. And a lot of the standards are very vague. So teachers can figure out what it looks like for kids to demonstrate the skills that they're talking about. You know, so project-based learning, you can still get to a lot of the skills, you know, without having to do them as like a multiple choice test, for example. You know, if a kid, and I'm thinking about the standard of citing evidence, which is one of the reading and listening standards. Students need to be able to read information and get, you know, summarize and get the gist of kind of what that that paragraph is talking about. So kids can cite evidence in lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be one specific way, and the standard doesn't say it has to be one specific way. So, you know, citing evidence for one student might look like pointing to text. For another student, it might look like highlighting text. For another student, it might look like verbally telling someone, right? So if they don't have the writing skills. So when I did my projects, I always had a number of things that I was trying to get the students to learn. So whether it was vocabulary, and then they had to have, there was a writing piece that was grammatically correct, right? So they had to meet those standards. They had to do a presentation in front of their classmates. So that addresses speaking and listening standards. So there are tons of ways to meet those standards without
And still have a project.
and still have a project. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think the projects are even better because kids actually have to apply what they know. And it's not just, I can memorize facts and tell you, the capitals of all the states, but
Do
if
I
I'm
know where they are in the country? Yeah.
right. But if I'm creating a map of those capitals, I can work on my map skills. I know where those capitals are located. I know some facts about those capitals, right? And I can tell you, oh, this capital is well known for this, right? So definitely a recommended strategy.
Thanks.
So this would be the first step in that multi-level piece. And this is just what we were talking about, thinking about whatever the grade level standard is, and then doing activity-based lessons, right? And you can go on to the next one. Okay. And so we pick our curricular standard that we're working on that day or that week or for that unit. Design activity-based lessons. Make sure each activity is on grade level. This one is super important because when the Hendry case came down from the Supreme Court, and I could talk about that for days, but basically one of the outcomes was kids have to have access to grade level materials, even if they are functioning well below their grade level. So a kid in high school who might be functionally working at a first grade level still needs some access to whatever their high school peers are doing, right? We can't just say, oh, well, we're just going to give them first grade standards, because we have to have high expectations for our students. So there are different ways that we can access those standards, and we have tons of resources at SERC around that. But if a student is reading Shakespeare, we can give them Shakespeare in a modified format. So if you have children with very significant cognitive disabilities, we can give them Shakespeare in a modified clicker version story, that has pictures, and it gives you kind of like a basic summary, but it's still what the same grade level peers are working on. So that one is really important. And like I said, since you can demonstrate the skills in different ways with the standards, it can look different for each kid, but then I can still do it at grade level because I can do it this way, right, or that way. So that's one of the things I love. And then again, going with the activity-based versus the lecture-based. I know this chart looks like a lot of information. It is a lot of information. I just put it in here because I really like the questions that we ask educators to ask about a student before making certain decisions. So the first set of questions in the first column is really about the curriculum and instruction. And so we say, can the student do this lesson as designed? So as the teacher wrote it, as they created it. If not, do we need to make some changes? Maybe the student needs an accommodation like extra time, or maybe they need a modification, they need a lower reading level, right? Because of that's where they're functionally performing. Maybe the student needs behavior support for that lesson, or maybe some technology will help them access that lesson. So, we first ask those questions, and then we say, okay, if those turn out to be no, then we say, can the student have personal assistance? Or is it appropriate for them to have support? So a lot of schools tend to just put a one-to-one paraprofessional with the student, but if we don't ask all these questions first, we might be just over supporting the student. So we want the student to have independence, right? But we want to make sure that they are supported as well. And so, I think in the past, the decision process was always, oh, here's Nikki. She has autism. She automatically needs a para, and she has to be in the room down the hall, right? So those decisions were all kind of made simultaneously without saying, well, hey, let's wait a minute. Can Nikki do parts of this lesson? Can we change parts of it so that she can access it? Does she absolutely need a personal assistant? Or, could there be parts where maybe we don't need that support? And can we do that in the general classroom before we look at, putting her down the hall in the specialized classroom?
Nikki, I love your questions, and I love that you're sharing them with parents, because parents can now ask these same questions. And having a son with ID myself, who went through high school, we asked some of these questions, but I think, the answer was yes, he always needed some support, but it was less than we would have thought if we hadn't asked these questions.
Yeah.
They were like in Spanish class, he could go with peer support and not need an adult to be in his classroom. In another class, he might need that adult to be there the entire time. But we really looked at his whole day and the different things that happened in his whole day and found lots of time he can be independent. So it's really important to look at in all areas,
Yeah, and because students might have strengths in other areas, and so your son did great in Spanish, and he didn't need that extra support. So I think that's the other thing that happens, is like decisions are kind of made and then it becomes a blanket for everything. Like, oh, well, Nikki, you need a para, so you need that person all the time, everywhere. Well, maybe not. Maybe in Spanish, I can do it without the para's help. And then in science, where that's a little bit more intense and there's a lot of vocabulary and there's a lot of like hands-on experiments, maybe I do need that support, right? So it's really looking at each place and each instance that the student needs support. So I love that story. Thank you, Jane.
And if a kid has a para that's there or available for when they need them, you can invite them to the PPT. And I will tell you, I happen to know my son's para because her daughter was a babysitter. And she would tell me, I can't go into Spanish. I don't know Spanish. How am I going to help him in Spanish? And he helps all the other kids in Spanish. So if she hadn't told me that, I wouldn't know that he was able to be independent and that we should pull that support.
Yeah.
So it's really, if you have a child with a para, invite them to the PPT and see what their strengths are.
Yeah. And then so that last question is about where can we, support the student the best? Can we participate in the general ed class? And we say, if no, right? So after we've asked all these questions, hopefully the answer is yes, but if not, then we say, can they be in that same classroom, but maybe in another part of the classroom, right? And then we say, if not, could we have them in another part of the school? So that's where they might be in the, in the program down the hall, but not necessarily sent to another school. And then if all of those are no, then, as your PPT team meets with the school, which you are a part of as parents, maybe another school or another location is the right option for your child, but that, that would be something that you all decide together. So. Okay. Here's another chart with a lot of information. I'm not going to go through all of it, but just wanted to show you, this is another one of the step-by-step tools that we can look at different kinds of supports available to help build that continuum that we talked about earlier, right? So that we have lots of options. So this really looks at who can support students in a classroom. So obviously we can have peer support, which is a very natural support, because, you know, a 10th grader probably doesn't want another adult kind of, we say Velcroed to their side, you know, because that might impact their peer relationships, because their friends might say, well, I don't want to sit next to Nikki because she's always got this adult with her, right? Like, and that we can't just be kids. But peer support is a really natural place that schools could provide supports to students. Obviously, this would not be a service in the IEP. Schools don't list peer supports, you know, in the IEP because peers are not certified educators. So, but we just encourage schools to think about this option because it really is a natural support. And so, Jane, just with your example of your son, that Spanish class, he was able to help other students. So he could be the peer helping other students in Spanish class, and then maybe other peers helped him in math or science class.
He actually had a peer help him in study hall because he would go to study hall and not want to do his Spanish work. And so he had a peer from the Spanish class in that and say, I'm going to sit down and do my Spanish. You want to sit down and do yours? And they'd sit and do their Spanish together. But until he prompted him, and no adult prompt got him interested. But that he was going to sit down and do his Spanish. Oh, I guess I can do mine too. And so that he did have support in a different way. And he did, you know, I always tell the story because it is a great story. He could memorize the scripts and they had to act out a lot of things. So everybody wanted to be on his team because he could prompt them. If they forgot their lines, they'd be like, Jake, what's my line? And he would fill them in. So it was a wonderful, positive experience all the way around.
I love that so much. I love that so much. I have to put a heart emoji on there because that is great. Yeah, so that, you know, each kid has strengths, right? Every kid with an IEP has strengths. And so if they have a chance to showcase what they're good at and kind of be the teacher, that helps everybody, right? So the next model in the middle column talks about support facilitation. So this would be a model where maybe you don't have somebody in that classroom every single day, but maybe sometimes, or 2 days a week or 3 days a week, somebody goes into that classroom. And this helps schools who definitely right now with staffing shortages can't provide somebody full-time like a co-teaching arrangement. So support facilitation gives schools some flexibility, and there's lots of different people who could play that role of a support facilitator. So that would be, you know, anywhere between 1 to 5 days a week. And it could be a para who does that. It could be a special ed teacher. It could be a social worker. It could be a bilingual teacher. It could be a, you know, a reading intervention teacher. It could be anybody who's a, you know, an adult in that classroom. So maybe 1 day a week, there's a special ed teacher in that class. And then 2 days a week, there might be a paraprofessional in that class. And then, you know, that para and that special ed teacher can rotate and support another class on the days that they're not in that one class. So it's nice because, you know, it just, again, gives schools some options for how to support kids in the general ed classroom, and then also recognize that they maybe don't have enough staff to be there all the time, right? You're muted, Jane. If you had a comment.
They're using equipment outside, but there's a question in the chat. You want me to read it to you?
Yeah.
Extracurricular activities. My son has a one-to-one blanket, as you said. I set up an arrangement with volleyball coach to have found a para to go to some practices and games to support him. I was hoping a peer could be the support. Is that a legal issue? Are extracurricular activities being incorporated into the IEP?
So as far as the legal issue, well, this, like, the peer can't be in charge of, the student. That would be a legal issue because they're not an adult and they're not, a certified person. But absolutely a peer could support that. Hopefully there's another adult there that can also monitor. Oh, great, he's doing fine without the para. If he doesn't need the para, then it should be fine for your child to participate in the extracurricular activities. We encourage schools to think about how they can support students to participate in extracurricular activities. So whether it is a para or another support that might be provided, we definitely tell schools to look at that. And I think, if that is something that you were interested in having, you would discuss that at your meetings and make sure that that gets into the IEP, because if it's not in the document, it doesn't exist and it doesn't have to be provided. So
what I'm hearing, Nikki, is the kid's doing well without a para, but the school wants the para there because they have a blanket para. My suggestion would be, if the school is nervous about not having a para because they feel it's an obligation, ask if the para can just sit and observe and not interact with the child, not be involved, just sit in a different place, so that if the school feels like that's their safety net, they have that person. But your child should not be prevented from participating if they don't have a person. That's another issue. But
right.
Feel free to call us. We'd be happy to talk to you about it if this is of concern.
Yeah, and I know the high school in our town does unified sports. And so I don't know if they have a para or not, but I know that they have one staff member who kind of runs the activity, and it has, students with IEPs and students without IEPs all together. And so there is, that one adult there who can be responsible for students. Yeah, I mean, parents can act like a chaperone. I guess you probably have to talk to whatever activity or club you're working with, because I know it just may be tricky to just have somebody there all the time, but that I would encourage you to talk to the school too.
And I just see the comment like karate. There are definitely folks out in the community that would work with you to say, what does my child need in the dojo? And, if you need to be present, if it's better if you're not present, that I think there's no legal requirement or anything in an outside activity like that. But a lot of folks are willing to work with parents who have children with special needs in those settings. I think the biggest thing is, if your child is participating and needs support, it does go in the IEP.
Yeah.
And if they have support during the day and they need that same support after school and extracurricular, that should be very clearly agreed upon, because we all agree it's the level of support the child needs. But as Nikki's saying, is you need to look at every setting. And if, for example, that one kid who's playing volleyball, if he's doing fine, he or she's doing fine without it, why would we put a para there? So it's the same thing as whether biology or science or math needs a person. We look at the setting and what does the student need? Thanks.
Exactly. Okay, if you want to go on to the next one. I'm just looking at our time. My goodness, an hour goes so quickly. It's already 10:45. 9:45, 9:40, 10:45. These I'll just kind of talk about quickly. This is part of the step-by-step, and these two forms are the day 2 component, where we actually take the student's IEP and think about where we can address goals and objectives in general ed settings. And then what supports. So again, going through kind of similar questions that we just looked at, what does Nikki need for, English class or math class? And it'll vary, it'll be different. So if you want to go to the next one, Jane, we can look at that. So these are just snapshots of the forms from step by step. Form 1 looks at the IEP goals. And this is nice because you might find places you didn't know you could address IEP goals. So it might be like, hey, Nikki's working on doing multiplication. And so one place that we could do that might be gym class, actually, PE, because we're actually doing sets of exercises, right? Oh, we need to do 3 sets of 10 jumping jacks. How many jumping jacks are we doing, right? So there might be natural places where we didn't think, hey, we can address that goal here. So again, it's, stopping to ask those questions. What do we need? And then the second form, which has a ton of information, is really just asking, what are those supports that we need? And we go through similar questions like we just asked. Can we do it as designed? Do we need accommodations? Do we need modifications? And then, do we need a person? Is that a co-teacher? Is that a para? Is that a peer? Whatever that is. And then we look at, does it have to be, a separate environment? So just kind of mirroring what we already talked about. Okay. So let's talk about co-teaching a little bit. You can go on to the next one, Jane. We talk about co-teaching as 2 or more educators. It does have to be certified staff. A para cannot play this role because paras in Connecticut are not legally allowed to deliver initial instruction to students. So it does have to be a certified person. It can be a social worker, a speech pathologist, a psychologist, a behavior, BCBA, like any of those people who have a license or a certification can play this co-teaching role. And so we think about this as kind of a very formalized arrangement where you have 2 people all the time when that class meets. So if we are teaching English together, we have a general ed teacher and a special ed teacher every time that English class meets to provide supports for the students. And so hopefully they have time to co-plan, and then they're teaching together and they're assessing the students together. So we love co-teaching as an option. I know we're running short on time, but I just wanted to think about the benefits and the impact of co-teaching. So actually, Jane, if you want to go to the next slide, we can just look at some of the examples. So these are some of the benefits of a co-teaching arrangement. So for students with an IEP, we're reducing stigma. They get improved instruction. We do have higher expectations, right? Because we're keeping kids at that grade level or working on grade level materials. For a student without an IEP, they're getting an understanding and respect of students who have IEPs. We're thinking of improved instruction. For teachers, they're working together, they're building their expertise, right? So, the special ed teacher is learning some content, maybe they're learning science or math content. And the general ed teacher gets to learn new strategies for supporting students. And it just kind of allows us to meet individual needs and lower that student teacher ratio because we actually have 2 adults in the space at any given time, which is awesome. Do you want to go on to the next slide, please? This is just a snapshot of, there are 6 co-teaching approaches, and the little squares represent desks or students, and the blue and red dots represent teachers. So you can just see how in the different arrangements, the 2 teachers kind of move around the classroom. And when we do work with schools, we actually ask or try to get schools to do the three approaches, the station teaching, the parallel teaching, and the alternative teaching, because those are strategies that actually reduce the student-teacher ratio. You're working in smaller groups. Both teachers kind of interact with all of the students. And so even though classrooms might be doing those other three approaches, one teach, one observe, one teach, one assist, and teaming, we recommend they do those for shorter amounts of time so that they can really do the other three, which really limit, the student-teacher ratio. Sorry, I love charts. We have a lot of charts with lots of information. I just put this in here to introduce universal design and just show you how it fits in the big system of what we are asking schools to do now with multi-tiered systems of support, which really looks at, how are we providing academic and behavioral and social emotional support for all students all the time, right? So you may have heard things like, oh, we have a 3-tier system. We have tier 1 and tier 2. And, it's really just all about how do we support the students. And so universal design, which is in the second column, actually fits kind of under that big umbrella of these are part of our systems that we have for the whole school. And so universal design is nice because it's predictive of what students need. We're looking at curriculum design and instruction, and the emphasis is really on flexibility, right? So we'll talk about that in a moment.
There's a question in the chat. If you can maybe talk also about kids who struggle with mental and social issues in your examples, that might be helpful.
Yeah, sure.
And academic, they have all three, so.
Yeah, and so, that might fall into different accommodations for students. Maybe having a break between content material or being able to, do 10 minutes of instruction and then take a break, or have extra time. I know my own kiddo gets overwhelmed sometimes with the demands. And so sometimes she just needs to be able to just put her headphones on and kind of like tune out the noise a little bit, or, have that extra time because she gets very anxious. So universal design actually comes from architecture. I'm not sure if you are familiar, but we've incorporated it into education because it made sense. And so the idea was, if we build buildings to be accessible from the beginning, then we can support more people without having to do lots of extra stuff or construction to the building. So it was really looking at how do we make buildings accessible, and then we said, well, how can we make education accessible, which is is really great. I'm going to go to the next one, Jane. So if you don't build those buildings from the get-go as accessible places, what happens is you have to retrofit and you have to go back and add things to it, which can cost a lot of money. They can not be the most attractive looking thing. So you see this old brick building and probably didn't have a wheelchair accessible entrance. So they built a ramp that is really, really, really long and goes across the whole building, right? And then and is now maybe in the back entrance or something. So it costs a lot of money to do that. And the Americans with Disabilities Act, kind of stipulates that buildings and schools have to have, a reasonable access. But if the building was built a long time ago, the people who own the building don't have to incur tons of financial burden just to update things, right? But the idea is that building codes change, and then things get more accessible going forward, right? So, you know, when we think of education, if teachers plan their lessons that way from the beginning, then they don't have to go back and make lots of changes. Oh, you know what? This is really hard for Nikki. Now I got to go change this part so Nikki can do it. But if I think about Nikki from the beginning, oh yeah, and I say, okay, and I put this part in place. Or, you know, you have that kid who's struggling socially and maybe either doesn't want to be with peers or wants to be with peers. I can make sure that, you know, Nikki is in a group, or Nikki's in a certain group, or, you know, maybe Nikki has the option to do things on her own if she doesn't want to be with the peers, right? So, you know, we think about those as we put our instruction together. If you want to go to the next piece. So this is the entrance to a, I think it's a shopping center in Toronto, Canada. And you can see the staircase has ramps in it. It has handrails. It has stairs. And there may be some people who still struggle with access, but at least we have opened it up so lots more people can actually get, you know, into the entrance without struggling. So it's not perfect because it doesn't cover every single person, but it does better because, you know, at least it provides lots of different ways that folks can kind of get into that space. So, if you want to go to the next one. So just some examples of universal design, things that we use every day that you probably didn't think of as universal design, but we have things like ramps. And, you know, after the pandemic, we have lots of hands-free faucets and soap dispensers and doors and, you know, other ways to access things. Closed captioning on TV. So we have closed captioning in our session. We've got, you know, Spanish interpretation happening in this session to make it accessible for lots of people to get in. So lots of things that we use all the time. Curb cuts, automatic doors. I love those because I usually have 50 bags in my hands and, you know, can't open the door. But lots of different things that are universal design. Next one. And so universal design is inspired by brain research so that we understand, basically, you know, we have to have a reason for why we are engaging in something. We have to have ways to recognize what we're doing or what information is being presented, and we have to have different ways that we can interact with that information. So you know, just basically thinking about those three areas of the brain and how they all work together to make meaning of things that we hear about, right? And if you want to go to the next one. So the whole point of universal design is about variability. And so making sure that there are lots of variety built into lessons and instruction. So we think about engagement, right? If we can't get kids engaged with the material, everything we say will just go over their head, right? So you're all parents, you have kids, and probably, you know, if you don't make meaning for why kids have to do things, it's just like, nope, I'm not listening to you, I'm ignoring you, right? But lots of ways that we can get kids interested in material and participate with material. Different ways to show material. So we can show different materials with visuals, we can show videos, we can show infographics, we can have images, we can have information in different languages. So for kids who are multilingual, right, we can have information there. And then action and expression. So this is different ways kids can show us what they know, which is goes back to my whole information about project-based learning, right? Kids can do a project and they can build it, and they can do a PowerPoint, and they can make a poster, and they can tell us all these ways that they have learned information. It doesn't just have to be, you know, taking a multiple choice test or writing an essay, because there are lots of ways for kids to demonstrate that.
Nikki, I'm going to interrupt you because I'm going to launch the poll. If folks could just fill out the quick poll, but Nikki's going to go through a couple more slides. I don't know if you have to leave, but I'd love for you to finish if you have a chance. I just need to catch anybody that might need to leave.
Yeah, I
guys
could
can
definitely
take-
stay on. 1 hour goes so quick.
Oh, okay, my polling is not active, so I'm not
Oh.
going to launch my poll. All right,
Okay.
never mind.
Oh, there it is.
Oh,
There
it's
it is.
great.
So you can feel free to answer that. I'll just keep talking for a couple more minutes, and yeah, I'm good to stay on. So yeah, so universal design is really an approach to curriculum, right? Using those ideas that we just talked about, right? So having lots of variety. And I'm going to skip the video for now, but Jane, if you, I'm not sure if you send out the materials, the link is in the.
When we post the video, we can post the PowerPoint.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's a short little 5-minute video that just talks more about universal design if you were interested. So, you know, we think about universal design as like a dinner party, right? We can't just serve one thing because we have lots of different guests who might be attending. So, you know, we've got somebody who's gluten-free, we have people with allergies, or they don't like specific foods. Somebody's a vegetarian, somebody just had a root canal, so they need soft, chewy, you know, soft foods, right? So we think about how do we support all these people who might be coming for our dinner party. And then we think about that the barrier is in the meal plan, not the person. So we have a big family, and when we get together, trying to find a food that all 12 of us will eat is challenging, right? So it's not Nikki's problem that she doesn't like fish, right? Well, the meal is only serving fish, and they know I don't like that. So I might bring my own thing, or I might, you know, my brother is pretty good about, you know, I'll make sure there's steak. So, and then UDL is not a curriculum, it's a framework, and it helps educators do options, right? So those options that we just talked about, different ways for students to engage, different ways to show materials, and different ways for the students to demonstrate what they've learned. All about variety. Okay. And then we talk to teachers about having a clear goal, right? So what's the goal for that lesson? And then are there multiple ways to get there? So if you use a GPS, I personally cannot get anywhere without my GPS. And I don't know what I did before my phone had that capability, right? And I had to rely on maps driving all over Connecticut. But there are different ways to get to the same place, right? So I do a lot of training in schools down in Southwest Connecticut. Sometimes my GPS takes me down the Merritt Parkway. Sometimes it takes me down 95. Sometimes it takes me back roads because there's a lot of backup and congestion, right? But as long as I get to my final destination, however I got there it's not as important, right? So if you had a goal of getting fit by doing sit-ups, I personally would never choose that because I hate sit-ups, right? So that would not be my go-to way to do anything. But, you know, we tell teachers that when that goal is too specific, you're limiting the number of people who will try that. If I had to do a sit-up challenge, I'd be like, nope, I'm not even going to participate because I don't like to do sit-ups. So if we think about the goal in a broader sense, what is the goal? Well, I want to do more sit-ups. Never my goal, ever. Other people, maybe, not me. And then I say, well, I want to get fit by doing sit-ups. Well, okay, that's still kind of too specific. My goal is to get fit. And so if you look at the icons, you see there's lots of different ways that I can do that. I could swim, I could do boxing, I could do weightlifting, I could ride my stationary bike, I could do jump roping, I could run on the treadmill, right? So I have options because my goal is very broad of getting fit, and there's no one specific way to get there, right? So for everybody, it's going to look different. And we talk about having these flexible options removes barriers that students might face in the curriculum, right? So if I'm struggling to read information at my grade level, but my teachers give me options, they maybe give me audio text, or they give me, the same text at kind of a lower reading level, I can access that in different ways, or I can watch a video to get the information that I need, right? And so, thinking about students who, have those mental struggles, and maybe a student has anxiety about presenting in front of the class. Well, maybe I can narrate a PowerPoint and then just play it, right? Or I can create a short video and then I don't have to present in front of the class, but you still hear my words as I'm doing the video. And so, here's an example. Just depending on what the goal is and what the way to get there is. So here you can see students will write a 5-paragraph essay on the life cycle of butterflies. Well, that's very, very, very specific. But we have to go back to say, what is the purpose of this lesson? Do I need kids to write a 5-paragraph essay, or do I need them to know about the life cycle of butterflies? Right. So if I need them to know the life cycle, I can actually have them do that in different ways, right? So they can do the presentation, they can do a poster, they can do a PowerPoint, they can narrate something, they can write a poem. So I think as parents, one of the things you can do is ask your child's teachers, what's the outcome? What do you want students to do? Sometimes it might have to be that they write an essay, but maybe that essay doesn't have to be about butterflies. Maybe they can write the essay somewhere else. Another example is in the classroom, a teacher might say, Nikki, you have to solve 10 math problems in 2 minutes. Well, I need to be able to solve math problems. The Common Core standards don't say anything anywhere about you have to do it in 2 minutes. That would be an expectation that the teacher put, right? So I can show you those math problems, and especially if I've got stress or anxiety around, timed assignments, I maybe am going to freeze if I do those in 10 minutes or 2 minutes, right? So maybe I need half an hour to do those 10 problems because that's what I need. We think about that. But we just kind of always use this little cartoon, right? Everything is variable. And so you have 4 different animals standing in front of the one-size-fits-all store, but maybe one size won't fit all, because I think those 4 different animals might not be able to wear the same, the same t-shirt in the same size. So we have options, right? We have lots of options. And again, just providing lots of variability in the ways that we teach material, in the ways that students access material, and the way that we can engage them. So these are the 3 principles of universal design. I'm not going to go through all the charts, but just kind of understanding engagement, different ways to represent material, and then action and expression. So different ways students can show us what they know.
That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you think maybe we should open the floor to questions given the
Sure.
time?
Yeah, that would be great.
If anyone wants to unmute yourself, feel free if you wanted to ask a question. If not, do you have any final words, Ms. Hendry?
I just would say thank you. Here's my contact information. So, you know, like Jane said, if you have questions kind of that are very specific to your student's case study, I'm not really in a position that I can answer those because of the nature of what SERC does. So I can't be, you know, an advocate for one student, but, you know, I can kind of give you general information. If you need that kind of level, I would definitely contact Jane at CPAC because they can support you with that. But if you have other questions about this or you're looking for more resources and tools, I'm happy to support you. Our office is now in Waterbury. So anybody who's out that way, our library is public and it's open Tuesdays through Fridays and maybe some Saturdays. And our building is in the old Timex building, right off of 84 by the Brass Mills Mall. So you can definitely come and check out materials from our library and
Or spend some time there reading, right?
yeah, exactly.
It's a
And
nice
there's lots
place
of
to
resources
go.
for parents. So you know, I just thank everybody for being
All
here
right,
today.
thanks, everyone. See you again.
Thank you.